part in our series on looking forward resiliency. It's nice to see you all. I know many of us have been just being for the past 12 months or so. I think back to the middle of March of 2020 when many of us left our offices and said, "Okay, we'll be back in 2 weeks," and it's now April of 2021, and so many of us have just been doing what we needed to do, getting by how we needed to get by, and so as we think about what right now looks like and what our futures look like, we wanted to invite a panel of three leaders who have taken this time and dealt with the hands that they've been dealt and figured out how to get by and to continue to be successful. You should have had their bios in the marketing material, so I won't take the time to go over their bios because I think we're going to have a really great conversation. So I want to go ahead and get us started. So what I'll do to kick us off is I will introduce each of them, give them a few minutes to tell us who they are and their organizations and or companies, and then we will have a moderated discussion, and then leave some time for you all to ask your own questions because we want you to be able to take the information from them and figure out if it's helpful for you. So without further ado, I will kick it off to our first panelist, who is Marielle Chotel. She is the co-founder at Hestia Harlow and the CEO at Silver Lining Design Company. Welcome, Marielle.
Thank you for having me. Um, I first wanted to start off with my definition of resiliency. And to me, it's taking large obstacles and setbacks and breaking them down into setups. Um, I can speak both on a personal level and a professional level to resiliency. From a personal story, in 2014, I lost my second child to SIDS when he was 5 months old, and he was also the product of multiple infertility treatments. So he was obviously all children are wanted, but he was one that I really, really tried for. Fast forward, I started Silver Lining Design Group, and the name came about because I wanted to find a purpose in my grief. And so I don't know how I did it, but like I said, many little steps at a time, I started this company. And from the beginning, we kind of kicked off, and I was able to give 10% of our profits to organizations that support grieving parents. So that's been a really fulfilling and wonderful transition from dealing with grief. And great story. I had my daughter after that. So that was a nice kind of silver lining ending to it. In terms of business, and I know Dana spoke about it, but I have Silver Lining as an event production group. And I feel like the event industry has been more affected than even an airline or a restaurant because we saw the cancellations before the world did. I actually experienced cancellations beginning in February of 2020, and I very much internalized it because I thought it was my fault or I wasn't doing something right when these things were canceling. And when the US and when President Trump came on and said, this is what's happening and we're shutting everything down, it was almost like um, a period for me to take a deep breath and realize that the whole world was experiencing this too. So while I was dealing with my cancellations, which we lost 90% of our revenue in 2020, and we're still very much in the eye of this storm. 2 years ago, I started Hestia Harlow because it was a void in the industry. And Hestia Harlow is, for lack of a better word, I call it rent the runway for events. So it's taking larger events, breaking it down into smaller tablescapes and food boxes and delivering it homes to various homes around the country. So 2 years ago, I had started this. And at the time, I had very little time to work on it because my other business was thriving. And I had two other partners who were building the website. And when the pandemic hit, I was forced. I mean, we had zero revenue, zero business. I was like, you know what? I've got this amazing team. I had about 20. I brought back with my first PPP 14 of them. And I had an amazing creative team that was just looking for hope and something to put their creative brains to. And I pushed them into Hestia Harlow. And basically in 8 weeks, we launched in a full collection. The website went live July 1st. By October 29th, the Today Show had picked us up for a pivot during the pandemic, which I greatly appreciate the pivot moment, but it wasn't necessarily a pivot. It was almost like a gift that I had been working on it to begin with. But Hestia Harlow has given me, I think hope is a huge component. I think if you don't have a creative outlet or something to look forward to, um, it's just very difficult to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And with this company and with my team around me, it's given all of us this, fortitude and strength to be like, you know what, we're still in the eye of the storm of this other part, but this part is thriving and it's a new concept. We're very much, it's succeeding, but it's still in the educational period. And it's just been a fascinating year for me. I mean, I've learned so much. I think resiliency, when I was asked to do this, is something that I'm kind of reluctant to say I'm a master at it, because it's a challenging thing to be successful in resiliency. But I've had a great support system, and I feel like it's just been literally day by day, and you just find the next roadblock or the next goal, and you just kind of hit it with stride and just be kind to yourself. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Marielle. Don't worry, we're going to hear more from her. Our next panelist is Kim Jones, who is the CEO of Nonprofit Village, and she is a CORE 2004 graduate. Thanks for being with us, Kim. You're on mute.
Unmute. All right. So we haven't even learned that after a year. So there's still a ways to go, but thanks for having me. And Marielle, thanks so much for your inspiring story. I was fascinated. I can sit here and listen to you all afternoon. So I'll be quick so we can get back to you and to Anne. So I am the CEO of Nonprofit Village. We are a nonprofit that is a capacity builder, and we work primarily with small and emerging nonprofits. It started around the region, but we now are working with organizations nationally as well. We do a lot of training, development, coaching, and we also have a shared space. And the shared space is the offices, meeting rooms, co-working space, workrooms that allow nonprofits to come in and have a professional place to work. So some of our revenue obviously is tied to that. And when the pandemic hit, we predicted that it was going to be about 20% of our business that would fall off. And we'd have to look at new business lines and other opportunities in order to make up that revenue. And it's directly tied to, obviously, rent that we have to pay to our own landlord. So it's turned out to be a slow drip, kind of this drip, drip, drip. And it's actually gotten to closer to 40%. And what this past year kind of forced us to do, we had already been in a mode of looking at a new business model for the future. So that had been we started that in 2019 with the board. And we took the rest of the time to say, okay, now we absolutely need a new business model. Who do we want to be? What do we want to be? Where do we want to be? And also pushing forward a little bit more on sunsetting programs. So in 2019, we had made the decision to sunset 2 programs that we just felt weren't relevant to our work anymore. We felt that there were other organizations that could pick that work up, do other things, and that would free us up to move into new lines of business. And an opportunity popped up because of the pandemic, and that was specifically in technology. We had been working on a strategy to get more nonprofits engaged with their own technology, building it into their budgets, understanding how to use it in case. And we weren't even thinking about pandemic. We were thinking, well, you've got a lot of women in nonprofits. What if, you've got to stay home with the kids because, dad doesn't stay home as much? Or what if there is another snowmageddon and, you're in for 2 or 3 weeks? So we ended up pushing forward on that very quickly and generating within about 6 weeks about $30,000 worth of additional revenue that made up for some of the other loss, and realized that was one of the business lines that we needed to move into. So the discussions that had already started were working, and we've taken that time to really kind of forge forward on that. The other part of it was trying to figure out, because our work exploded, organizations needed a lot more coaching, more organizations needed help. We were getting calls from all over the country for assistance in helping organizations figure out which relief packages in their states, were they were eligible for, and how they apply for them. So it wasn't just Maryland or DC or Virginia. And we ended up working this kind of 24-hour clock. And we're a small team, like most nonprofits, 3 people, really 2.5. And one person has a young child. And I said to him, you're going to end up going on this 24-hour clock and just working whenever you can. Your 8 hours are going to be all over the place. You just do what you can. And he said, oh, but that just doesn't make sense. I need to be working during working hours. And I was like, it's just not going to work. So I ended up making sure that we pulled back to a 36-hour work week from 40 hours. Just worked on, like Marielle said, just whatever's important day to day, and looking at some other strategies that would help us. But I think the most important thing is realizing that resiliency, we realized after a couple of weeks, we'll never get through this long term if we don't recharge. And that became what resiliency was. So it had to be recovery time and recharge time. We couldn't take a lot of time off for vacation, but we could do shorter hours. We could just, when we had to reopen in July, we opened for shorter hours. So we're only in the office 15 hours a week. The rest we do at home, and we could do those things to allow us to recharge, so that we didn't want to be rewarded for pulling an all-nighter. That was what we want. We don't do that for our kids. Oh, great, baby, you pulled an all-nighter to get that project done. We reward them when they kind of do that, over time, pacing themselves. So that's what we realized we had to do, and that's what resiliency kind of became for us.
Thanks, Kim. Yes, we all had to deal with that new term, Blur's Day, and there was no longer a line between when you stopped working and started dealing with your families or whatever extracurriculars that you could contend with. So thank you for sharing that. Our third panelist is Dr. Ann Kademian, who is the Executive Director at the Universities at Shady Grove. Thanks for being with us, Ann.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. And thanks, Marielle and Kim, for sharing your stories. I was really appreciate being asked, Dana, to do this, because it did force me to stop and think, like, was I resilient this year? Where did this year go? It is the whole year is a blur in a lot of ways. So I'll just share 2 quick things with all of you that are that were one personal and one related to work. And then we can talk about how we can talk about resilience more generally. But so a year ago on March 14th, my husband came home from work. He works at Children's National Medical Center, and he was sick with COVID. And we didn't know what it was. We heard, we kept thinking, well, he's not coughing. Does he have a fever? I don't know. Like, we kept looking at all the symptoms and thinking maybe he doesn't. He passed out at 4 a.m, completely blanked out. We didn't know what had happened, called the ambulance. It was just chaos, because the ambulance didn't know if we had COVID, if he had COVID. Everyone was trying to figure out how to work with this. spent the night in ER, and I was there with him, sealed in this room with, no one knew what to do with us. And he went on to have 2 more trips to the hospital, one to Johns Hopkins, another one back to Suburban, a couple of different emergencies. He was very sick for about 2 months, and then he's a long termer, right? He still has a lot of the COVID symptoms and things. And then in September of 2020, after all this, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, a giant brain tumor that had to be removed. And so, I think back on that experience, and in some ways, the brain tumor was less problematic than COVID because we had a great surgeon. We knew it was going to happen. He told us the process, how long it would take him to recover. And so I feel like we went through, he went through brain surgery. I went through with him with a kind of calm and a kind of steadiness because we had good information. Whereas with COVID, it was just chaos. We never knew what to expect from day to day. Nobody could tell us what was going to happen next. It was just like a roller coaster ride. And I know many of you have probably experienced the same thing. So, there was this moment where I just paused to say, wow, just some certainty and some knowledge was just the most helpful thing in the world to be able to get through this. And I think that's been one of the most difficult things of this year is just the total uncertainty of what's happening and what's coming next. Then in October, I took a new job. So I had been at Virginia Tech for 17 years. I'd been on the faculty there. I'd been a director of the School of Public and International Affairs for 7 years. I had worked out of the university system president's office there for a number of years. And so this was a big move to come to this place called the Universities at Shady Grove, which I had heard of and understood that it was this really interesting campus, but had no idea exactly what Shady Grove was all about. And the more I learned about it through this process, it was a very long interview process because it was all on Zoom and I had to meet about 100 stakeholders, all related to Shady Grove, got to know more and more about it. And, started thinking, I really want this job. I really, really want this job because it is like the dream job. It is an educational system, an educational institution that is focused like a laser on equity, on access, on affordability. An incredible student body of students who commute to school, who have families, who have jobs, who have complicated lives, and they're working so hard on their degrees. And we partner with everybody. We partner with 9 other universities. We partner with Montgomery County, with businesses. We have this amazing board of advisors. We partner with Leadership Montgomery. It's just this dynamic, hyper-connected place with so much possibility in terms of being a big player in this educational ecosystem focused on equity. So I was really excited to get this job, was so excited that it happened. And as I think back on it now, it was a lot of, I'm doing it all virtually. I'm stepping into the shoes of this former executive director who is, just a remarkable individual who led this institution for 20 years with such grace and wisdom. And, so filling big shoes, haven't met too many people in person yet, doing everything by Zoom, trying to figure out this network. And yet I think what has made it nevertheless thrilling and exciting for me has been the mission, like focusing on the possibility, focusing on the students, focusing on what can be. And so I think Marielle said this as well, that focusing on what you care about, what you're passionate about, why we're here in the first place, the opportunities we do have. That's really what has made this transition, which has been a different one, has nevertheless made it really exciting. And of course, in my family, we're healthy. We all made it through. So there are so many things that are challenging, but there are also things that we can do, things we can lean into, things that we want to work on, things that carry us forward. And so for me, that's what's been the most important, is just focusing on what's possible and what we can do, and focus on the excitement of the story, the excitement of the possible, even though there's a lot of other challenging things around us. I think that's what's been most helpful for me through this process and through this transition. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think what I was struck by in the conversations with all 3 of you is that although you have very different stories and very different lines of work, the commitments that you have to your collective missions. And it's so incredible to hear how that has kind of guided you, all three of you, during this time. I'd like to start with the first question, and I'm going to ask this question to Marielle. How are you able to cope with the pressure and stress throughout constant changes and shifts over the past 12 months?
Well, Anne brought up a great point that I think the pandemic and COVID stripped us of a lot of our planning. You know, we were all of a sudden in a tornado or trying to figure stuff out, and things were more difficult because you didn't, you know, maybe like a brain tumor, it's very like methodical to have it removed, versus COVID was like, I don't really know the enemy that's here. And I very much, in the beginning, I want to say the first 8 weeks, I felt like I was probably like so many Americans, attached to the TV, watching news, you know, letting the fear like kind of come into my body. And I was like, oh gosh, but I was so used to working in the event industry. I mean, I was working all the time, and traveling all the time, and going from, you know, 180 miles an hour to like nothing, standstill. It was definitely a shock. So once I kind of got through the, okay, this is actually happening and I have to move forward. Some of my stress and relaxing techniques have come a lot from meditation. I am a huge follower of Deepak Chopra, and I probably am attached to one of his meditations daily. Also, it's allowed me, this last year has allowed me time with my family, which I do remember. My 2020 wish for New Year's last year was I didn't want to travel as much, and Lord knows I got my wish. Never putting that out into the universe again, because I was just on the road all the time. And so when the world kind of told me, or the universe told me, I've got to sit my butt back down and realize what's around me, my introverted and introspective nature was just like, okay, I'm just going to ground myself with the people who are here with me. My family's healthy. It was a lot of, like I said, meditation, working out. I'm a huge proponent of getting those levels boosted in your brain, and just the quiet things, right? I never had the quiet things prior to the pandemic. I never sat down and did puzzles. I never, sat down and journaled and all those things. So that has been kind of a lifesaver through the last 8 months.
Thank you. Anne, I'd like to ask you the same question. How have you coped with stress and pressure over the last 12 months?
So I'm a big fan of exercise as well. I used to be a runner until my husband got sick and we were in quarantine for a number of days. And so, I discovered, low impact, YouTube videos and things like that. So, but I walk every morning. I'm a big fan of just music and listening to music, and when people aren't looking, dancing, and my 70s mix, from high school days is a lot of fun. But it's also, I think I really like the way Marielle said this, kind of finding those quiet places. The whole family, we all sit down together at dinner in the evening, and my daughter's working with me on my Farsi, and my other daughter's in Montreal, but we just talk, and she just tells me everything she's doing, and she just tells me what she's working on and what she's thinking about, and it was just very calming to not feel the pressure of being in the whirlwind all the time. And it's okay just to slow down and to think and listen. And so for me, it's those times with my family. My family has been they're just my North Star. When I'm getting a bit crazed, or when I'm feeling, really stressed, or, my daughters, they just have such a different way of looking at things. I feel like through their eyes, they're 26 and 21. The pandemic, they're experiencing it in very different ways than I, as an older person, am experiencing it. And, in some ways there's so much more mental stress and so much more depression associated with this. And so, you know, them kind of helping me understand how they're seeing things and their perspective on things is just, it really helps me put things in perspective. And so that's been a great coping mechanism for me as well, just to listen to my daughters. They're so wise. They have such a perspective and such appreciation. I feel like even though, you know, raised them, I've been with them their whole lives, I still feel like I didn't always hear them. And so, you know, this time I'm hearing them in ways I've never heard them before. And it's very, I've learned a lot, but it's also just very centering for me, and it just puts things in a different perspective. So I think my daughters have been really key to how I'm coping, I guess, through this time.
That's very powerful to talk about that distinction between listening to them and hearing them, and how that has changed and how those conversations have shifted during this time. Kim, I'd like to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit. You talked about how you had some forward-thinking plans that Nonprofit Village had already been thinking about, and then you went through this time and had responsive plans that you needed to make because of the pandemic. Talk to us a little bit about what was that big picture thought for you, and how you kept your eye on that big picture during this time.
Hmm. Um, Yeah, so we were going through, this period of looking at new models and new strategies. So this became a little bit of an opportunity, and it allowed us to engage, our stakeholders, especially board members, a little bit more. It allowed us to talk among each other about what we really wanted to do. And we learned we had to just take control of take charge of what we could control, as opposed to letting everything control us. But looking at the big picture, it became a little bit more about, what changes we could put in place that made sense and that could probably not require us to keep shifting. The constant change. Oh, okay, we're closed, now we're open, part-time, or, people's family lives have changed at home. We've got one person who is having a second baby, so that's going to impact the ability to work, different hours. My son came home during that time. He was in his last semester, actually, at UMBC, and kind of freaking out because he's an international affairs major, and he just graduated in December, and he was like, nobody's hiring in international affairs. I was like, no, not now. And it might be a while. So, and he's still looking, so we kind of had to kind of calm him. So it was both work and home. What can we control, and what can we look at, that are strategies that can kind of take us into the future? For work, it became things like the no meeting Fridays. We just do no meeting Fridays. You don't book meetings on Fridays. We only work a half a day that day. We put in some other things. No matter how badly you want to talk to one of your colleagues and say, oh, I just need you to check this, and you might decide you want to work all night, but no emails to each other, no texts or anything after a certain time. So they all just get held until the next morning. So we'll continue with all of that. And then kind of stepping back and focusing on, I guess, the future. What do we want to keep? So now that we've defined some actions that we can take that make things a little more palatable, what do we want to keep? And some of that is, this partial remote work, until we probably will never go back full time, but we'll still have to, because we are kind of a landlord, we have to be there. At home, it became, what did we do? Oh, one of the things we did, we started in probably May. We watched, after watching Coco and Soul and all the other, Pixar movies and stuff, and not taking phones downstairs. So we literally went to the basement. We have a big screen TV, no phones, no nothing. We would take food. We do takeout Tuesday. We, do that. It became takeout Friday also. And then we decided to watch the entire Marvel comic series, the entire Avengers series. It took us all summer. And I felt like such a slug recently when somebody told me that his daughter, 17-year-old daughter, discovered The Simpsons and watched all 31 seasons. I was like, oh, nothing compared to our Avengers thing. But those are the things that we'll keep. We now have those kind of routines that we do, and we like them. And I no longer cook every day. That's overrated. So it's been about, what change we can control, and then what do we want to keep going into the future, I think.
No, that's great. And very ambitious with some of the series watching, which, I think we need. Going back to the conversation about stress and coping, we need those shows, those books, those moments when we can just unplug as we continue to move forward. I'd like to give an opportunity to Marielle or to Anne if you would like to talk about what your big picture was for either of you.
Do you want me to go first, Anne? Okay. Well, I think when all of this happened to my my first company, I quickly realized that most people expected us to kind of jump into the virtual event world because that's what every event production company did. And while I was grateful that everybody else did it, I kind of took a different approach and was like, you know what, there's people in this industry who were kind of doing it before that have a passion for this. And I really want to do something. If I'm going to pivot or embrace change or innovate, I'm going to do something that is going to excite me. And creating like just tech and virtual events wasn't my it wasn't in my DNA to just like get really, really excited about. So the thing, when I launched Hestia Harlow, I was like, okay, how do I do this and how do I incorporate this into my existing business? So although our company is direct to consumer, we were able to kind of meld the two together a little bit so that our clients who have virtual components can use our products for their events. And it's our side of the business that I really, really love, because again, it's like that creativity. It's like the touch, the feel, the food, the kind of like the love of life that I love about events, and like, getting around the table and sharing a meal and, conversation starters. So, to me, the big picture was really about sticking with my core mission of, bringing people together, this, just this love of congregating, and how do I do that in an isolated year? So.
Go ahead, Anne.
Thanks. I just want to say how much I appreciate Kim's point about controlling the things we can control and not the other things. So it's very wise, Kim. I think just even sorting that out is really a really helpful exercise. And but in terms of the big picture, I for a couple of years I've been kind of standing around telling anyone who listened, higher education is in trouble. Higher education needs to rethink what we're doing. We've got to think big picture. We've got to think out of the box. We're too expensive. We're not accessible enough. And people are like, yeah, I know. Okay, yeah, we know, but like, how do you want to change, and what does that look like? And so I don't know, but like, and then this job came along, and it's like, okay, Anne, like, give it a go. So what's the expression? You have to put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. And so, right now, the universities at Shady Grove, in addition to going through the pandemic and pivoting to completely virtual, many of our students here at Shady Grove experienced the pandemic in such a difficult way: food insecurity, housing insecurity, not having good Wi-Fi to be able to get onto their classes, having to drive over and park in the parking lot so they could use the Wi-Fi in the parking lot for their classes. Not being able to find a quiet place in the house, or all the kids are on doing their homeschooling. There's not enough Wi-Fi bandwidth, for everybody to do it. Like, there's so many layers of complexity that our students and our faculty have had to work through to try to carry on, and staff trying to carry on as well. So it's been very challenging. And yet I think the fact that Shady Grove is going through our strategic plan right now, we are thinking USG 2.0. Where do we go from where we are now? What's next? Focusing on what's next and how we can be a space of innovation for higher education, how we can be a space of innovation for rethinking relationships between community and anchor institutions, between multiple institutions of higher education and students, between the needs of the economy, the shifting economy, and how we support that. I think that big picture of change and innovation, and being able to try to think of what is the model, what is the narrative that can meet those needs, and can, in some ways, build on the chaos of COVID that has really broken down a lot of the institutions and the layers that we might have been afraid to look at before, hesitant to look at before, just assume that it's a given. But you can question anything now. I mean, so many things are open. We've shown we can do a lot of things differently. So I think it's this, in a way, it's this, COVID has been so stressful and so painful and so difficult on so many levels, but it's also kind of shattered a lot of our mental blocks that we've had to rethink what's possible. And it's given us the ability to think about, so what does higher education look like in the future? Can we say any student who goes to Shady Grove graduates debt-free, graduates with a job waiting for them, graduates with a mentor waiting for them, has experiential learning while they're here, has a mentor while they're here, has multiple touch points across before they get here in terms of preparing to come here? Like let's think big. Like let's do it. Let's make Montgomery County, the hub of educational ecosystem innovation. That all that feels so much more possible now coming out of COVID, because I feel like the urgency of it, the tremendous urgency to do this right, from an equity perspective, from opportunity perspective, but just a lot has been broken down during this time. So I think that's what, COVID has been very difficult, but it's also given us permission to think very differently and big. And why not aspirationally? Why not go for it? If we aspire high enough and we focus enough on it, we can actually do it. So I think that's been the way that it's been inspiring for me to keep focused on that bigger picture.
Thank you. I'd now like to turn it over if any of you have questions. And I'm wondering, Sylvia, I know you put a question in the chat. Would you mind unmuting and stating it for everyone, please?
Thanks. So my question's for any of you or all of you. So as leaders of your organizations, your people are looking to you to help them with their resilience. And you've answered some of this, but I'm going to push you a little bit more. I mean, the year's been FUBAR for you personally and your families. What is it that you said to yourself in order to be strong for them and help them get through the year?
Who wants to take this? I can speak. I'll give you a kind of a breakdown of what I did throughout the year. So right when I guess it was like March 12th last year, I can't remember the date, but I remember talking with fellow business owners in my event kind of industry locally. And I had one gentleman call me and he said, Marielle, you have to lay everyone off. Like, this is so bad, just do it. And it was like a gut punch, I've never had to do that. These are, staff members who I've, worked, invested in, care about. And it was on top of all the other stresses. Then I'm like, okay, to save this, I have to do this. And in that moment, it was incredibly terrible. I mean, I wasn't even with them. So imagine making these phone calls because you weren't even, in the office with them anymore. So that was incredibly traumatizing for them and for me. And what I did, which I think helped for the next couple months, was I was brutally honest and extremely vulnerable with what I was trying to do. So although we didn't have any business going on and they were seeing more and more events cancel, they're CC'd on these emails. I didn't cancel anyone's emails because it's like, you're off indefinitely. I was like, everyone keep their computers. I don't even know what's going on. I'm like getting, whiplash. But what I did was every week, at least 2 or 3 times a week, I would give them full email updates of things that I was doing, from on the phone with my senator, on the phone with my congressman, listening to this webinar, understanding what the implications, because I wanted them to know that I was advocating for us as a team and not just for me. And it took, there were some emails that were so painful for me to write because I was so disappointed in myself. Like, God, why am I in this situation? And I internalized a lot of it, but it also was cathartic to write it down and say, guys, I'm struggling too. And, I've put, like, everyone's in a bad spot, but I am going to be put me in the ring. Like, I'm going to throw some punches and I'm going to get us back. So I literally spent the 2 months until my first PPP was approved. And it was like, when it happened, I have never burst into tears so much over something like that. Like, I actually remember the call, and I'll give credit to Senator Van Hollen. His name is Bart Kennedy, greatest man on this planet, called me and said, I've spoken to government affairs because there was a glitch in my application was gone missing. It was a whole fiasco. It was like everything went wrong. And he called me and he said, you're going to get a phone call in 5 minutes. And I got a call, and they told me that it was approved. And I just cried. And I remember emailing my team. I'm like, guess what? You're coming back on Monday. And we all kind of it was like a camaraderie thing because they had seen all the steps that I had gone through. Since then it's evolved and we're much more, it's not on my skin as much, if that makes any sense. Like, it's not as sore. But it's just kind of just being honest and vulnerable and saying, like, this is what's going on and here's my plan. Honestly, them hearing my plan or what didn't work, like showing that you're fallible, has been great in building community within us.
And I most identify with you in the events industry because I speak professionally on stage at events. And so the speaker business went away 90%. So, I was like, yep, I resonate with you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marielle. Anne or Kim?
Yeah, my story would be similar to Marielle's. I think she said that so eloquently. Being transparent with people, or learning to be transparent with the team and with stakeholders, and asking for their input, but infusing that sense of community, and that sense of camaraderie. We are all in this together, and I'm trying to lead you through it, but I'm not the one that has all of the answers, and bringing all of that other brain power along, I think, was very important. And you know we did the same thing. We went after all the relief programs. We got, I think, almost everything we applied for. Personally, I would send lunch to people's homes. It would just show up. They'd call and say, I just had lunch delivered. What is this for? It's just because you needed lunch. I figured, you said you were working and you needed lunch. You weren't going to take a lunch break. We started to have some fun meetings online, and it wasn't just with the staff, but also with our nonprofit members. We played games. We did all of that. With the board, I brought in a mixologist, and she created a nonprofit village signature drink and showed them how to mix it and answer questions and everything. So that was a board meeting, and it just took the load off a little bit. But I think one of the things that I would say that I learned is that work is not a place anymore, and community is more than, I guess community is more than just people. Community means so much more now, and having to keep that community together, I realize that it's more than just the people. But work is not a place anymore.
I'll just add that when I started here, I couldn't meet anybody in person. You know, so I was starting a job, stepping in for somebody who had been here for 20 years, who knew everybody really, really well. And, you know, frankly, I think people are like, well, so who is she? I don't know. Like, you know, and why should we trust her? And, you know, who made her I'm not saying that that's necessarily, but I think people, you know, they couldn't meet me in person. They couldn't get to know me. And so I've felt like it was really important to try to communicate as much as I could. We created the first ever staff advisory council here at Shady Grove over the last couple of months. I think making, you know, creating as much opportunity for voice and for participation, and, you know, for people to be sharing how they feel. We wrote personal thank you notes to every single member of the staff. You know, I think we did it with our cabinet. I think I wrote about 40 of them, and, you know, just long notes thanking everyone for what they did and how much we appreciate them. And, you know, I know this is really hard, but, you know, things will get better, and, you know, you're a champ, you're a hero for doing this, you know. And so you know, whatever I could do to just communicate with someone how much I appreciated what they were doing and how much I understood how hard it was, and to, you know, be honest that I'm new, you know, and you don't know me yet, but, you know, I'm doing my best to try to create a sense of direction that we all can get excited about and put our hands on the steering wheel and go forward. So I still feel like I'm figuring it out, Sylvia. You know, I still feel like I'm figuring it out. I don't know until I see everybody in person, even, that, you know, I'll have it figured out. So, but thanks for your question.
You've got a little bit of celebration from one of your colleagues, Anne. Just wanted to point that out for you. So you've all talked a little bit about what you've done to support your teams and your staff and everything that they're going through. Did any of you feel that you had to make any adjustments to your leadership styles in order to respond to this time?
I didn't feel like I needed to. Oh, I'm sorry. Anne, do you want to go? Oh, okay. Yeah, real quick, I didn't feel like I needed to make any changes. I don't know. I guess I am who I am. I think I'm the same person most of the time. Trying to not be so gripey, you know, grumpy, worrying, because, you know, there were things to worry about, and you know, realizing, okay, well, to a certain extent, I'm sitting in a position of privilege. I didn't lose my job, but I could anytime. If this thing goes, you know, bad for too long, yeah, we could be in a position where we're either going to be furloughed, or we're, you know, all two and a half of us could be laid off, or whatever. And I just tried to stay away from that, but I don't think I made any changes. It was just making sure that I was a lot more transparent.
I would say for me, the I don't know if I necessarily changed, but my role changed because when you go from, you know, running 1,000,000 miles an hour and I was on the Inc. 5000 list. We were growing at 150% a year, and then going from that to nothing. It's almost like I jumped back as a CEO of a startup. So it was kind of like, okay, I'm no longer, my challenge might not always just be about leadership. It's actually like doing it too. A lot of getting back into the nitty gritty. So my, my day job, like I didn't have as much staff to do all the things that I used to, like just be like, oh, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? So it was definitely I had, just had to change my perspective.
Yeah, for me, I just feel like, you just have to be completely yourself. You have to be completely authentic during this time. There's no there's no opportunity to kind of, I don't know, test out something new, or it's like you've got to just go with what's your gut and what feels right to you and who you are. But it does force you to be really clear about who you are. I mean, I think this time is really, taking on a new responsibility during the pandemic. It's really forced me to say, so what do you like? What are your core drivers? What do you believe in? What do just really thinking hard about the things that are really important to me, and what drives me and what motivates me, and relying on my own instincts. And I just like that, like, this was not a time to change who you are. Like, this is a time to get super 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 authentic about who you are and just rely on your gut. So I feel like that's been kind of my driver through a lot of this.
So I'm going to read a question from the chat. This question is for Kim. The nonprofit sector is so mission driven that overworking is often seen as part of the normal state, and the pandemic exacerbated this. Your approach was sane and smart. Lots of practices that Franca, who is the one who put in the question, hopes can carry forward after the pandemic. She's curious about your perceptions of how the sector might change structurally and ways that will support this kind of resilience, whether it be board structure, engagement with the community, and or relationships with philanthropy.
Yeah, I'm not a mentalist. I don't know what the future will bring. One of the things that I guess one of the things that we were faced with was real pragmatic solutions for organizations, and we found over and over with, I think it was more than 300 organizations, we it kept having to go and ask the question, well, sometimes I actually wanted to ask, well, what were you thinking when you first, started the organization? But we kind of had to ask, well, where's your business structure? And I know there are people who disagree with that philosophy that a nonprofit is first a business and should, operate itself as a business in many ways. But I happen to hold to that. I think that there are good business practices that need to be instilled, and we found ourselves finding the real solutions, actually literally helping organizations find new contracts, or shift from I can't do a gala to call whoever was working with you and ask what you can do electronically or digitally or online for an event. And now that you're on, we've given you money to create your Zoom platform or something. So whatever those solutions were, and I would hope that moving into the future, we look at what our business models are, which is what we had been doing, and looking at not just our passion for our mission, but the relevant ways that we can execute that, and execute it with a variety of avenues. And that means avenues for funding as well. And I think that was the one thing that kind of saved us, is that we had business lines or revenue coming from different avenues. So it wasn't just, gee, we have all these donors, or we just have all this philanthropic money, or we only have earned income. We had all of these different areas, and it gave us a chance to go back to those stakeholders and talk about reinforcing that. And some of it was lost for us as well. I'm not sure we did a great job at really building our own capacity. We were so busy, helping to build everybody else's capacity. And we were very proud. We had to report recently to a foundation as well as to county government that we didn't lose a single nonprofit. We did get 3 of them to merge with different organizations or do joint partnerships. So that structure changed. We did a lot of work with boards, trying to get organizations to really look at the right mix of board members, whether that meant pulling back a little bit, having less, or expanding and having more, and making sure that they had the right skill sets to move forward. So I think all of that structure will be important. I hope that answers. You said that was Franca?
Yes.
Was it Franca? Okay.
Yes.
I hope that answers her question.
So we have just a couple of minutes left, so I'd like to ask the closing question that'll go to all three of you. You've all shared so much that you've been through in the last year. Are you happy with where you're at now? And do you feel like some of the things you've learned in the last year you will carry on for the future? And I'll start with you, Marielle.
That's a great question. I'm happy because it made me settle in a, like, settle is not the right word. Maybe I just calmed down a bit. I was able to, instead of just running around and letting life pass me by, I have felt like I am aware of a lot more around me just because of the momentum slowed down. I don't think I will ever, as let's say everyone gets vaccinated or herd immunity or whatever the next steps are, and life begins to come back to its normal, our version of normalcy. I don't think my industry will ever be the same, and I'm actually so excited about that because we needed the rug to be pulled out from under us to kind of change it a little bit and modernize and innovate and like think on our toes, which my industry as a whole is, they're great thinkers, they're great problem solvers, but we're always pushed on a day or a moment, not as a big picture. And so that kind of strategy and looking at this and basically no idea is a bad idea, forcing everyone to be like, okay, how are you going to do this? Or how are you going to do that? Or me introducing Hestia Harlow, it was actually the perfect time because had I done it last year, maybe people would have been like, oh, that's kind of, why? Even though I knew I have a mission to it, right now it even became more important and more prevalent. So I am, although it's been painful, I'm grateful and I'm excited about where this can go.
Thank you. Anne?
Yeah, I'm happy. I mean, I think it's a kind of contentedness and a kind of gratefulness. Really, really grateful for where I am right now with my family, and grateful for this job, and grateful to be working with the people that I'm working with. There's like, I haven't seen a lot of my colleagues I have not met in person, but I know that I'm with an amazing team. That people who Shady Grove has been successful for 20 years because people give so much, they care so much. And it's just remarkable to be working with a team of people who are so dedicated to the mission. Hopefully we can implement some of the great ideas that Kim has lifted up about, getting people to stop working a little bit early some days and not sending text messages at 2 a.m. And, these kinds of things that we all get into these habits of, as you say, everything is blurred and we just, so I think that these are really important things. But nevertheless, there is an energy here that is very inspiring and really motivates me and just makes me feel really happy and grateful to be here. So yeah, rough year, but happy.
Thank you. Ms. Jones?
Yeah, I'm going to echo Marielle and Anne. Happy and grateful. What we've been through, it's taught us, and what we've learned from it. Maybe we're not where we want to be completely, but we see ourselves on that path, and we're happy with where we're going. And I think I'll be happier when I get a chance to work with Marielle and Anne. I want to work with you all. I want to come and do some things with you all. I'd love to talk to you afterwards about some other things.
Thank you. Thank
Very
you.
inspiring. Thank you.
I want to thank our three panelists, Marielle Shortell, Dr. Ann Kademian, and Kim Jones. I want to thank all of you for your time this afternoon. We have all been through a lot. These leaders have shown us that the path is not always straight. It's not always easy, but in the end, it's usually wonderful. So thank you all for your time this afternoon. We hope to see you next week for the third part in our series on health and values-based leadership. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.